Hello and welcome to our lecture series, Climate Protection. Maybe you've heard in the news about the Climate Change Performance Index evaluation. Well, if you look at the map and if you look on Austria, it's not so promising. So Austria is on CCP range 32. That's not really good. So we have a lot of tasks to do in the future. That's not very promising at the moment. So you see the ranking, first, second, and third place is not held by any country because the criteria are not fulfilled by none of the countries. So it starts with Denmark and Sweden in the top ranking, and Austria is worse than medium European, which is 19 CCP range. So we have to speed up in climate performance. If you want to inform about the emissions worldwide, maybe you have heard about the Climate Trace project. The homepage is now online, where you can see the map on the left side, or the globe, where you can see the bar graphs of the emissions in detail, which is mostly on satellites measurements. So feel free to visit this page. It's really interesting. Yeah, and today we have our special guest, Stephan Tischler. Stephan Tischler is an expert in the area of Alpine transport infrastructure and engineering and special development and economic analysis of transport infrastructure, and he's environmental ombudsman of the Tyrolean Region Authority and advisor to regional and local communities and firms. And today he will give a lecture about the role of spatial planning in climate change using the example of traffic. So we had already a lesson on traffic and climate, which is on the details like electric cars and things like that. If you want to hear this, you will find it on the YouTube channel. It's from 1.5 years ago, but now it's especially on spatial planning in climate change. Welcome, Stephan Tischler. Thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot, Rainer, for the invitation and also for the introduction to this very interesting series of lectures. As you can see, my name is Stephan Tischler. I'm part of the Institute for Infrastructure unit of Intelligent Transport Systems here on the campus Technik. Let's start with the presentation. The presentation is about the role of spatial planning in climate change using the example of traffic. That's the long title. Maybe a short introduction also from my personal experience, because I recently studied, or recently 2 centuries ago, I studied spatial planning at the University of Technology in Vienna. And then I was writing my Ph.D. here in civil engineering on transportation in Alpine regions. So that's my background, and that's somehow explaining also the title of this lecture today. I was informed that you are students from different disciplines all over the universities. So maybe some of you already have seen some slides here, which I will present, but I think some of you are new to this topic, especially regarding the interferences between mobility, transport, and spatial structures. So I would like to start with a first more theoretical part now, which should give you some basic information how mobility, how transport, and how spatial structures are connected to each other and belong to each other. And it might be a little bit surprising, but I will start with a complete different discipline, with psychology. Going back to this hierarchy of needs, you may know it from your school. You may know, all of us, we have physical needs. We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to sleep. Then we have needs regarding safety, regarding social issues. And on the top of this pyramid, which was first introduced by Mr. Maslow, is self-actualization, self-employment, something like this. And why I'm explaining this to you is because this is somehow the background why we move. And centuries ago, it was 60, 70 years ago, some geographists, scientists from geography on the universities of Munich and Vienna, they tried to make a connection between this pyramid of needs and mobility and transport. And I will just in 1 minute try to explain to you why we have to move in the space. Just for the beginning, every one of us has a location, a home where we live. Thousands of years ago, this was a cave or a hut, or now a house, an apartment, something like this. And around the place where we live, we perform our activities. We go shopping to fulfill our physical needs, like eating or drinking. We are meeting friends in a restaurant, in a bar, somewhere else. We are going on holiday. We are going to the university. Because all these activities, which go back to this hierarchy of needs, cannot be fulfilled at the place where we live. So we have to move. And for centuries, the only way to move was going by feet. Now, since 150, 200 years, we have other possibilities. We can go by the cycle, we can go by car, we can go by train, we can fly. We can also use the ship to reach these destinations where we can perform our activities. And this is the reason, or this is the basic explanation why mobility, transport, and spatial structures are strongly connected to each other, because spatial planning, spatial structures define where we can perform the activities, where we can go shopping, where are places for shopping, where are supermarkets, where are restaurants, where are educational facilities, where are medical facilities. This is part of the spatial planning of the spatial structures, and this explains why spatial structures are strongly connected to mobility and transport. And you can see this is not a single discipline, transport planning, especially regarding mobility issues. It's a combination of various involved disciplines. Of course, my core discipline is transport science, dealing with transport planning, regional science. Then we have spatial planning involved. We also have social geography and, like in the beginning, psychology. For example, why do people choose the car for the mobility or for this way and not the train or the public transport? Why do we choose going by bike and not walking? This also is strongly related to psychology. And on the other side, we also have disciplines such as ecology, geology, political science, economic science. And putting all this together to one picture, as you can see, it's a very complex picture, which should give you an overview which process is involved when you are dealing with mobility issues, with transport issues, with spatial planning issues. So it's not enough to say we want to reduce traffic by, I don't know, reducing speed limits. You can see every part of it is also connected to other disciplines. So there is no single view, no single discipline dealing with spatial planning as well as transport planning. I know this figure is a little bit complex, especially when explained just in a few minutes. So with the next slides, I would like to show you some examples you may know, some examples you may have already experienced, but maybe not from this point of view. And this is the situation I think every one of us experiences today. So we have our home location, and from this home location we start every morning going to the university, going to the supermarket, going to, I don't know, do some sports, going to holiday. Some of these activities are performed frequently, every day, every week, every month, something like this. Other activities are performed only on special events, for example, attending conferences or going to holidays. And the places where we perform these activities also are distributed around the world, let's say it this way. Especially activities we perform only one time a year or one time a few years. Other places, especially activities we perform very often, very frequently, like shopping, are located close by, nearby. So most of our ways, most of our routes are very short routes within the city, within the local areas. And for centuries, for a very long time, I've already mentioned it, we were sticked to walking. Walking was the only way to move around, maybe horse riding, just to mention it. So the spatial structures of the countries all over the world, and especially the spatial structures of our settlements, were influenced by walking. And just to give you an example, especially here in Alpine regions, we can still find these very small villages. The houses were built were very close together. You always had a little church close by, maybe also a small school. So all these facilities which you need frequently for your physical needs, all these facilities are together at one small place. And if you look at ancient cities, especially here in Europe, but also around the world, you can find it in South America as well as in Asia. Also the cities, the structure of the cities were built to reach from the city center, the farmland, around the city and going back within 1 day. And also the city, the distances between the city and the next city was always reachable within walking in 1 day, so approximately 20 to 40 kilometers. This was a limiting factor for the growing of the cities, as well as of for the structure of the cities. This explains also why ancient villages and cities have very small roads and streets, because everything has to be very close together. There was not enough space to build houses with very much space in between, because the walking distances would have been too long to reach from one part of the city to the next one within a day. But that changed dramatically 150 years ago, when steam machines were invented, when the first cars came up. By the way, the first cars were not with fuels like today. The first cars were driving by electric energy, because electric cars are much easier to build than cars with fossil or cars with fuel. So the development of the cars initially started with electric motors. It was just a matter of the fact that people wanted to go or wanted to drive longer distances with the cars, and there was no possibility to save the energy or to save enough energy to ride with these cars for long distances, and that's why the fuel motor came up and was much more successful. With these new technical possibilities, motorized cars, trains, it was also possible to move or to move for further distances, and this was also the background of a very important conference and a very important urban concept, which is mentioned here on this slide. It's the La Charte d'Athènes. It was a conference of urban planners, of urban and regional planners, 1933 in the city of Athens in Greece. And there is one important name, famous name, always mentioned with this conference. It's the French architect Le Corbusier. You may have heard already this name, a very famous architect, and he was one of the spokesmen of this conference. And he said, let's forget all these ancient cities, these dark cities with very narrow apartments, with very unhealthy conditions for living, very dark rooms, and after the First World War, we know that these bad living conditions in these cities form the base also of political issues. So let's make use of these new technologies like cars and trains to rethink urban planning totally. And he said the best thing to do, the best strategy is functional segregation, which means that we should try to segregate living from working, from shopping and from educating. All these functions should be separated in space. So he said, this picture here, let the sun shine into the cities, let completely rebuild these European cities from the scratch. Let's design new areas for living. Then we have areas for working, for industries. We have areas for shopping and so on. And this was a very, let's say, a very famous or radical theory, but it influenced urban planning for centuries or for decades now, all over the world, not only in Europe. You can find it everywhere, from Brazil to China. These pictures just show you these flats, and these flats you will find everywhere, also here in Innsbruck. Just imagine the settlement areas at the Olympische Dorf in the eastern part of Innsbruck. They were also built after the Second World War, and the base of this thinking was this charter from Athens, this theory of functional segregation. You have a separate place for living, you have a separate place for working, for shopping, and so on. Of course, these flats provided a completely new kind of living. Every flat has the same conditions, has the same light inside the apartment. There is green around, there are playgrounds around. In the settlement areas, you will find shopping facilities, supermarkets. You will also find medical facilities, educational facilities. So these are small towns within a town. And for working, you can use the car or the train. You have to move to other places, but this is no problem because you are using motorized transport. So the total travel time should be more or less the same like before when you were walking in the small, narrow city centers. Of course, we know now, several decades later, we know also the negative consequences of this functional segregation. Just imagine here, this is one of the consequences. For example, this accessibility for shopping, these small shopping facilities, for example, they were vanishing because there was no reason for them to survive. Besides these big shopping centers, they also had the problem that there is no parking space because people now were forced to use motorized transport. On the other side, we saw the development of shopping centers around the cities. Just to mention also here, we have the CIPRA, we have the Dates, big shopping centers outside of the city which can also only be reached by cars. And the interesting thing is also in these shopping centers, if you look at the structure of the shops and the architectural or the functional concept of these centers, you can see it looks like an ancient city. You have shop by shop, nice streets just for walking. The picture just changes if you look from above on this huge buildings, on these huge areas, shopping areas, because the picture before was taken somewhere here in this area, in this building area, and all around you have huge parking facilities, because these shopping centers can only be reached by car. So the consequence is car is the only way to reach these centers, and we are depending on the availability of cars, on the accessibility to cars. Just to give you another example, housing. These two projects were awarded an energy prize for energy efficiency, because this this house here on the right side, also this small group of houses, apartments here on the left side, they are climate neutral. They produce their own energy and they consume less energy than the average house. On the other way, if you look on the details, here you can see huge entrances to garages on both pictures. So both houses are somewhere located outside of the urban development area, or of the urban city area, or somewhere outside the village centers. And here again, like for the shopping centers, we are depending on the availability of cars, and that's the reason why we can see here this big entrance to parking places. And if you look now at the statistics, this is just an example, an excerpt of the model split in the province of Tyrol, which is, by the way, collected every 10 years by the administration. So every 10 years, the administration of the province of Tyrol, as well as on the national level, is collecting data about different figures regarding mobility behavior. And one of the most important figure, let's say this way, because also the politics stick to it, is the model split. And the model split is showing you the share of mode of transports segregated in different spatial areas. For example, here on the left side, we have the urban area. In Tyrol, this is the city of Innsbruck. This is the only urban area here in Tyrol. And you can see the red one here are the passenger cars. So the passenger cars have a share of approximately 25% of all ways which are performed every day by all people living here in Innsbruck. On the other way, we see also 22% of all the ways are done by walking, and also interesting 29% are walking, and 22% are cycling. That's a good share also compared to other cities, but it is now, it was better a few years ago, because now other cities are performing better than Innsbruck. Anyway, interesting, especially for us in the spatial planning and transport planning. Here in the urban area, we have 25% share of private cars. If we move outside to the suburban areas, and the peri-urban areas, and then especially very rural areas that somewhere somewhere far inside of the valleys. For example, in Eastern Tyrol, we see this share of private cars goes up to 60%. So 60% of all the ways the people living in villages, in very rural areas, 60% of all the ways are done with private cars. Only 4% of the ways are done by cycling. And you can see now this is the difference, and this is one of the main problems we have to deal with, this car dependence, especially when moving outside of the city. And this is one of the main targets and one of the main issues spatial planning has to deal with. So in the third part now, I want to show you this the impacts, especially regarding climate change, of these developments. First, I want to come back to this issue regarding housing inside the city or moving outside to the city, to the suburbs, to the rural areas. Because one of the main reasons why people move outside, and you may have experienced something quite similar also here in Innsbruck, one of the main reasons is because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to find an apartment somewhere in a municipality some kilometers away from Innsbruck, in the Inntal Valley, or somewhere to the west, because the living costs, the cost for the apartment, the rent for the apartment are much cheaper there than in the city here in Innsbruck. On the other way, and that's some part or some issue many people are not really concerned about, the mobility costs, the costs for commuting, the costs for driving every day to the school, to shopping facilities, the mobility costs on the other way, they are rising, they are going up when you are moving far away from the city, because you need a car. The car also costs when you drive, now even more than 1 year ago, and so on. So putting this together, living costs and mobility costs may give you a different picture of the costs regarding the location of your apartment. And a recently published publication named it Transport Poverty and Car Dependence, and the colleague from, I think it was from the University in Hanover, he identified 4 dimensions of poverty. One of it is mobility poverty, because you don't have more money available to perform other ways of mobility. For example, you own a car, you have the operational costs for the car, for insurance, for gasoline, and so on. So you don't have money available to buy, in addition, another Klima ticket or something like this. So this means mobility poverty. You only have one mode of mobility available, and this is the car. You are not using public transport, you are not using cycling, you can just use the car. The other dimension is affordability. as well as accessibility. For example, the shopping center, it's only accessible by car. Maybe there is a bus, but this bus is only driving one time per hour or something like this. And last but not least, we have negative external effects of transport, such as noise, air pollution, something like this. And you may experience negative effects of transport even in a region which is not directly connected to this transport. What does that mean? For example, you're living in the Wipptal, south of Innsbruck here, in a community or in a municipality like Ellbogen. Ellbogen is not connected to the highway, but on the other side, Ellbogen is affected by the highway, which runs on the opposite side of the valley, by noise, by air pollution, and so on. So the people of the community of Ellbogen is affected by these negative external effects, and that's also one of these dimensions of poverty. Some other figures, some other interesting facts regarding car dependence, for example, also from another scientific publication recently published. The colleague made some investigations about accessibility of medical facilities, especially in the United Kingdom. And the next hospital within 30 minutes. You can reach, if you use the car, so 91% can reach the next hospital within 30 minutes by car, but just 38% can reach the next hospital by taking the bus or the train, by walking or cycling. So in case of emergency, in case of any serious issues regarding your health, you should better use the car. If you don't have a car, you have a big problem. Some other figures, this is now for Austria, and it shows the recent development of transport, of mobility behavior. For example, the share of private cars. This is the total number of ways we perform every day. 1995, so 25 years ago, it was 51%. Now this average share of private cars raised up to 57% in the year 2001. If your company, for example, offers you a parking space, then the employees, 82% of the employees of this company use the private cars to perform their way to work, from home to work. Parking space is one of these main issues, very important issues. If you have a parking place available, if you know you can park your car at the place where you work, at the place where you shop, then you are going, or in most cases, the people are using the car for this way. And the last figure here, also the length of daily distances went up during the last 25 years by 21%. We are not really driving longer, because that's also an experience we made all over the world, and it's also well documented in a lot of research, that the total duration of all the ways we perform every day, every week, is more or less constant. All of us perform at around 3 or 4 ways per day, and also the total time is more or less constant. But what changes is the speed and the travel distance. So if we want to travel longer distances, we have to speed up. And what we are doing is building new ways for trains, also new highways to speed up. So we are able to perform longer distances, long distance rides within the same travel time. One impact which makes us very concerning is the land consumption. Land consumption means permanent loss of biologically productive soil. Let's stick to this definition. For example, here in Austria, and this figure is just showing the additional land consumption per day in hectares per day in Austria, and you can see most of the areas here belong to building areas, but also the yellow part here directly belongs to transport infrastructure. So you can say every day around, let's say 12 hectare up to 14 hectare of productive, biologically productive soil is used for new settlements, for new companies, for new industrial areas, but also for new parking places, for new roads or something like this. And finally, just have a look. This line here, this red line, shows the target of the government. So the government says until the final year of their period, which is 2024, they would like to reach this target line, 3 hectare per day. Actually, you can see also here in this figure, it's a long way to go for the next 2 years. We'll be surprised if we come closer to this line, because this last year here, it was 2020, and we know quite well what 2020 means. Especially now, if you have a look on the greenhouse gas emissions from transport in Europe, these are a statistic from the European Environmental Agency, very recent data from October this year, shows the greenhouse gas emissions from transport in all European countries. Interesting to see, there was one positive development a few years ago. This was due to a not so positive event, because it was an economic crisis starting 2009, 2010, which also led to less traffic on the roads, less traffic in the air. That's why we've experienced here a positive development regarding greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, 2020, we have seen less greenhouse gas emissions due to several lockdowns. But this was only 2020, because 2021, 1 year later, last year, the data and the emissions were going up, and every expert is quite sure that 2022 we will see a same level of greenhouse gas emissions from transport like 2 years ago, like 2019. This development is even more impressive if you look at the development of greenhouse gas emissions on a relative basis. Also the separated to different modes of transport. Also here data from the European Environmental Agency for all member countries of the European Union. The starting point here is the year 1990, and you can see the development. Example here for the railways is a very positive development. The reason why railways have reduced the greenhouse gas emissions is very simple. Either the railways were electrified during the last years, or the operation was discontinued, and this railway line was put out of service. That's why these greenhouse gas emissions for railways are performing in a quite positive way. On the other side of this figure, you can see here, this is international aviation. And this international aviation also had the most dramatic drop regarding greenhouse gas emissions during 2020. But numbers of this year are missing in this figure, and we know 2022 the international aviation has already reached the level before COVID pandemic situation. So we are still on a way to a new record of greenhouse gas emissions, especially regarding aviation. Coming back to Austria, this figure shows the greenhouse gas emissions from various transport sectors here in Austria. This is data from the Environmental Agency, in German the Umweltbundesamt in Vienna. This dark blue and blue area here shows the share of private cars. These are emissions from private cars. Forget the year 2020. The year 2020 is not really very relevant because we know that 2021, which is missing here because there's no final data available now. I have already checked it. We know that 2021 will be quite similar to 2021. That was the last year. 2019, the year before 2020, and the year before all the lockdowns came up. Interesting also that the share of aviation in Austria is very very low. So most part here in Austria regarding greenhouse gas emissions from transport are a result of private cars and also from freight traffic. These are the yellow, the light yellow, and also the dark yellow areas. Regarding the climate impact of passenger transport, and this is now only passenger transport, these are not trucks, not heavy or light trucks. This is also very interesting, and this is also a very, how should I say, a very complex topic, because there are several studies performed every year which deal with the climate impact, the greenhouse gas emissions, the greenhouse gas balance for different kinds or modes of transport. And there are always different methods of calculating the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate impact of all these modes of transport. So it's very it's not so easy to get a full picture which shows every mode of transport in a comparable way. Anyhow, I think this publication is a very good way, or a very good example which shows the climate impact of passenger transport, also separated, starting with the infrastructure, with the vehicles, with the energy supply, also with the use phase. TTW means tank to wheel. So that's, for example, the energy you use to drive the car. And then this is here the energy weighting factor. This is more an issue regarding aviation. Anyway, the most important impact on climate regarding passenger transport has motorcycle, of course the car, and of course the aircraft. Interesting because nobody, or only a few people are thinking about motorcycles, but motorcycles are a very interesting issue regarding climate impact, also regarding safety issues, external costs. If you look at the external costs of motorcycling, motorcycling is in the lead of all these passenger transport issues. I've mentioned that it's very complex, very difficult to compare all this research, all these calculations together, especially when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And I just experienced a newspaper article a few days ago. It was in a Switzerland newspaper, Handelszeitung, and a journalist was writing an article there saying that riding a bike produces more greenhouse gases than riding a car. Interesting. His theory or his calculation was that if you are riding a bike, and he was calculating it for a cyclist, like he's doing part-time job for distributing of meals in cities like Lieferando or Yum or something like this. And he says riding the bike, when this guy is riding a bike, he also needs energy, and this biker is also eating to get his energy, and you also have to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions of the food he's eating. And he calculated that this guy who is riding, for example, 5 hours a day for a company distributing meals or books or something like this, through the city, he has to eat 1 kilogram of meat. And he said 1 kilogram of the producing of 1 kilogram of meat is, from a climate point of view, from the if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions, you need to produce 1 kilogram of meat, has more negative effects than producing the same energy for the car. So he came to the conclusion that riding a bike in total is has more effects, negative effects on the climate than riding a car. Interesting theory, which is not the first time that we hear some such arguments, but it's interesting that this is published in a newspaper, especially in a Switzerland newspaper like Handelszeitung. Anyhow, maybe I have to stick a little bit to this argument during the next weeks. Maybe this is also a reason explaining the situation why people are driving to fitness centers, sitting on the bikes or walking on machines, then going back to their cars and driving back home, also paying for sitting here on these cycling machines. Any questions in between? No? Okay. So now I want to go more a little bit into policies and strategies. How can we, or how can the society change the situation? Do we have to change it? Yes, we all know we have to change it. Also, we know it better by every week, hopefully. And I want to start with the European Green Deal. You may know it, minus 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in transport by 2050. That's the ambitious goal by the European Commission. There's also a sustainable and smart mobility strategy behind this European Green Deal, which defines some more targets, especially regarding transport and mobility. By 2030, the targets are not really, I think, too ambitious because they remain very, very soft and very undefined, very unconcrete. High-speed rail traffic will double, yes, but this is not really an issue if it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. 100 European cities will be climate neutral, okay, but big cities, small cities, which European cities, why 100? It leaves us a little bit, there are some questions rising up. Anyway, by 2020, and I think this is the most important issue, all cars, vans, buses, trucks should be zero emission. But now the question is, what is zero emission? Is it electric cars? Is it with e-fuels? Is it hydrogen? Where does the energy for the producing of the energy comes from? Then we have rail freight traffic will double. Interesting issue. We will see if this goal is really feasible. High-speed railway will triple. On the national level, the government published this year in spring of this year or beginning of this year, it was the Mobility Master Plan 2030. And they have a very interesting, there's a very interesting target path included in this Mobility Master Plan. And I think this gives a more clear picture about how we could, or how the pathway could be look like to reach this goal, climate neutral transport. And Austria is a little bit more ambitious, like the European Commission. It says that by 2040, transport in Austria should be climate neutral. And the way to reach this goal is marked here. and you can see these are million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which have to come from different parts, from different strategies. For example, the biggest amount of greenhouse gas emissions in Austria could be saved if all motorized transport is electrified. This is 9 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. 6 million are by reducing the fuel export, which is, by the way, actually not an issue, because the prices for fuel in Austria are now these days are higher than in the neighboring countries. So fuel export is actually not a big issue, but we don't know how the prices develop during the next years. We will see. But have a look on this here, and I think this is one of the most difficult parts. This is regarding mobility behavior. So this mobility master plan by the Transport Ministry here in Austria, I think it is a very interesting example of how a target pathway to climate neutral transport could be look like. 3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions could be saved if we change our mobility behavior here in Austria. And by doing this, this is not a new feature, it's not innovative, it's not ambitious or something like this. When I studied spatial planning 20 years ago, we already had always in our mind, we have to plan the cities. We also have to take care when making development concepts for regions, for areas, about this issue, reducing travel times, shifting the model split from road to rail to public transport, also supporting all these active forms of mobility like walking or cycling. And we also find it in official papers like here. This is the Austrian spatial development concept. It's writing about pushing sustainable mobility or traffic saving spatial structures. This is one of the main targets of spatial development. The model splits, especially regarding long distances, should be shifted from road to rail, and on short distances, it should be shifted from road to walking or cycling. This was the spatial development concept of 2001, so 21 years ago. You have seen before on the slides before, we have not really been successful with these targets. It's more the opposite. We have seen the ways with cars are still increasing, the distances are increasing, and there are also less people in the cars now than 25 years ago. 25 years ago, we had 1.4 persons, in an average, of course, car sitting. Now we have 1.1 persons in a car. So we are far away to reach the goals which were defined by the Austrian spatial development concept in 2001. We have a lot of concepts, especially regarding spatial planning. Another one is here, the Alpine Convention. There's a separate protocol about spatial planning and sustainable development. And you can also find issues such as improving the connections between the regions, especially with public transport, supporting environmental friendly, carbon neutral means of transport and something like this. This protocol was signed 30 years ago by all member states of the Alpine Convention, and this is from Monaco to Austria, all countries, including Switzerland and including also the European Union. But this is it's not really relevant if you look on the daily on the daily issues, especially in municipalities. Just to give you another example, a few weeks ago, end of October, 24th of October, a new paper was signed by all ministers of the Alpine countries from France to Austria. It's called the Simplon Alliance because Switzerland has the chair of this alliance. And it should be an Alpine action plan to climate neutral transport and spatial planning. Interesting, this event for signing this document was not attended by the ministers of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So maybe this was also a political signal. Of course, some of the issues in this document are really very interesting, and they look forward to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Just to mention, for example, the introduction of an Alpine-wide ticketing solution, which is, from my point of view, a very interesting or very important issue, because if you are now traveling from Austria to France, you have several ticket institutions. Every country has their own ticket system. We need something which is more simple, especially when you are look for cross-border connections in between. But now, and this is now the final part, I would like to give a short outlook how the situation could look like, or what should we do. And this is a picture I had taken on, I think it was the beginning of June 2020. You know this bridge, it's the European bridge on the Brenner Highway. There was another lockdown. There was no traffic running over the Alps, no freight traffic, no passenger traffic. And these were also a situation where all transport scientists in Europe were very busy, because some of my colleagues were saying, yeah, this situation now with COVID will change the way how we perform our mobility, because we now experience how it is to travel short distances by riding a cycle or by walking. And we have experienced this new way of nearby mobility, it's called. It's Nahmobilität in German. So we will lose the interest in traveling long distances. We will re-experience what is close to us. We will more focus on regional shopping, on performing our activities in the area around us. Now, 2 years later, we know this has not really happened, and even in the year 2020, this nearby mobility causes some other problems, over tourism in places which have never been confronted with tourism, with over tourism. All the ways were performed by using private car, motorized cars, because it was not really possible to fly away with the plane. So the people used their cars to travel to Europe, to travel to locations close by, to spend their holiday or their leisure time. So this is just a short an example. It's very difficult. And there was a former chancellor of Austria who says everything is very difficult, very complex. I use this quote here from a more famous person, Aristoteles. I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination. And that's somehow a good quote when it comes to mobility and spatial planning. I would just like at the end to stick back to this mobility master plan, which I think is still one of the most interesting papers or political strategies regarding a pathway, a potential or a feasible pathway to reach the climate goals. And it also says that we have to change the modal split in passenger mode in a way which makes us able, or which enables us to reach these climate goals. And remember, 2018 we had a share of private motorized transport by 31%. So this 61%. So this 60 plus minus % of share of private motorized transport is one of these key figures we have to change. And by 2040, it has to be reduced by 20% to 42%. Remember, inside the cities, for example, inside the urban area of Innsbruck, we are already much better. We are 25%, but we also have to include all the suburban areas, all the rural areas, all the peri-urban areas, and altogether we have to stick to this number, around 40%. This is one of the target features we have to reach regarding the share of private motorized cars. Of course, we have seen numerous of documents, of strategies, of papers dealing with instruments and tools, how we can change the way of spatial planning, of transport planning, tools which are necessary to implement. And now I think the toolbox is really full. We just have to use now this toolbox, and we have to go into actions. And this is still an issue. I think all of us, all of the scientists, all of these societies, we still have the problem to convince the political parties to stick to these actions. Of course, this is affecting everyone, spatial planning, especially because spatial planning always has to do with behavior change, also has to deal with property rights, with costs and so on. And it's a very long way. And just to give you an example, it's also like people who are mentally, physically in a very bad condition, maybe they have too much weight. We can go to the hospital, they will get the bypass for the heart, and this emergency situation may be solved for a few weeks, months, but then the problems occur again. The only way this person can survive is to change his behavior, to change the way he eats, to change the way he performs activities, his fitness and so on. And that's somehow similar to spatial planning. Spatial planning is not something which can be changed from one day to another, not from 1 week to another. It's a very long way, as you have seen at the beginning, the development of spatial, of urban planning concepts for cities. So these are some examples for actions we could perform. Some of them are very simple actions. Some of them are require more political, how should I say, more political interest to perform these actions. Like, for example, the integration of mobility issues for financial supporting instruments for which you use for rebuilding houses or apartments, because actually there's not really a funding criteria such as where is this building located? Is it also accessible by public transport? This is, for example, something which could be very easily introduced in such financial supporting instruments. Then other issue, redefining rules and regulations for parking places. This is now done by every community itself, by every municipality. Some of the municipalities also here in Tyrol, they require that each apartment must have 3 parking places. So if you are building a house in this municipality, you have to build 3 parking places. It doesn't make any difference if you have 3 cars or if you don't have any car. You have to build with your house, with your apartment, you have to build 3 parking places. And as I've shown you at the beginning, parking places is one of the crucial issues. If you have parking places, you are using them for parking cars. And if you are using cars, if you have a car in your parking place, you are also using it. Some other urban development concepts which recently came up. There are several numbers of these new concepts now for rebuilding or for transforming existing cities into more climate neutral cities. I've just put 2 examples now at the end here in this presentations. One of it is this 15-minute cities. This sticks back to the beginning, to the first slides which I showed you in my presentation. It means that every facility for performing your basic needs is reachable within 15 minutes by walking or by cycling. Of course, this is in a European city, in a city center, this is not really a big issue. If you're living more in the outskirts or in the suburban areas, this is a challenging issue. Nevertheless, it's now all over the world in discussion, this concept. Some say it's a 15-minute city, some say it's a 20-minute city. Also in Innsbruck, some ideas came up to transform Innsbruck in a 15-minute city. Last but not least, this is also an interesting concept. It's called Superblock. In Austria, we say Superkretzel. What does it mean? It means that you reduce the number of streets which are accessible by motorized cars in existing cities, and you are reducing the streets by making one-way streets instead of streets which are accessible in both directions. And actually, for example, Barcelona is performing a new urban development concept based on this series of superblocks. And you can see a tremendous or a significant change, especially regarding the total length of the road network within the city. Before, it is approximately 900 kilometers long. Afterwards, if this concept is really transformed, is fully transformed, only 350 kilometers of the roads remain accessible by cars. All the other roads are just accessible by cycling or by walking or by public transport. And the superblocks are in discussion now in various cities, from Paris, also now in Vienna. We have the first project now on the way, where in the 10th district, in the southern district of Vienna, first area will be transformed to a so-called superblock. So finally, I would like to come to an end with my presentation with this picture, which is a good example. It was shot for an advertisement company for a car producing company. Anyhow, I think it shows quite well we have to rethink mobility. We should not have any fear or thinking stops. So we should think in all the directions of how we can organize the way we move in our space. Anyhow, thanks a lot for your attention. And I think I've seen some questions arising in the chat.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah, it's quite a lot to think about. And for those who are German speaking, maybe it's nice to have to listen also to this presentation from Hermann Knoflach. You know him, I think. It's also recorded and available on the YouTube channel. And he is really radical in thinking and promoting walking as traffic. And from his point of view, the radical extinction of cars, more or less, transforms the space. So as you explained, spatial planning was according to the car in the last centuries. And if you turn it around, if you again think about walking, the spatial planning will change immediately, radically. So maybe that's, yeah, one part. If you want to go down to 90% reduction in transport till 2050, that's really tremendous what we have. Yeah, there are several questions.
There is several questions in the chat, and I want to start with the question: if would be the public transport for free here, is there any studies or anything else what would say that would be increasing the capacity?
Yes, there are a lot of studies, a lot of research regarding pricing in public transport. And even now we have several studies undergoing. You may remember this €9 ticket in Germany during the last summer. And some of the, how should I say, in some of the criticism about low pricing in public transport, they were confirmed during the summer, especially regarding capacity planning. And I think all of my colleagues, also from Germany, we just had a discussion on a conference, on a recent conference, came to the conclusion that public transport is not an issue for cost-free. So transport must have a price, also public transport. And you will not convince people to take the public transport just in case it doesn't cost you anything. That's also an experience we have seen, and which is also confirmed now by the €9 ticket in Germany. Because then you have overcrowded public transport, you cannot build so much capacity to take all the people in the same way of comfort like you are used, or yeah, like you want to be taken. For example, you don't have a seating place or something like this on a train.
That would be leading me to another question, but it's my own. But it's leading me to the question: what is your perspective, or how do you expect the autonomous driving cars? Is they are coming in the next 10 or 15 years, and how they would be change the transport of people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's also discussed quite well within our community. It was more a topic a few years ago, and I don't know why, but during the last years, autonomous driving was not so famous because everyone sticks to electric driving, just electric driving. Anyhow, there are publications and research done, and they came to the conclusion that autonomous driving will bring or will shift people from public transport back to the car. Because it is, we experienced something similar or in a similar direction regarding electric cars, because electric cars, like famous brand names, I don't want to mention it now, you know what I mean. It's somehow sexy, or it's a symbol of innovative or of lifestyle to drive an electric car. And the studies came to the conclusion that autonomous driving makes it easier to drive. You can also do other things. You can read a book while driving. So the argument going by the train, because you can work, you can read, you can also do it now inside an autonomous driving car. So this argument is not a special issue for using the public transport anymore. But it's still a long way. I don't expect that we will see autonomous driving in a short time.
You don't expect? You don't?
We don't, no.
I want to open the questions for the auditorium if you want to. Or also I want to say to Markus Einklemmer, if you have the question still, please put it in the chat or open the mic. There are no questions. Yeah, sorry. Then there is another question. It was on the slide 19 or 20. And there was the question, perhaps you can remember in the focus, are the connections that bad in the areas, or it's because of the costs, too expensive public transport? If you put the slide again, perhaps you can remember. Yeah, it is in the rural area, and it's about the public transport, why it's that low. And is that because the connection that bad, or it's the costs are just too high? I think questions or similar question.
Okay. There are several reasons. One of the reasons is yes, because the connection is not the best in rural areas. This also has to deal with economic costs, because you cannot have the same standard like every 5 or 10 minutes. You cannot have a bus connection on rural areas. There's no way to finance such services, and that's why the buses are only going 1 time per hour or every 2 hours or something like this, and then you take the car. And the other issue is that many places for shopping or for educating, for medical facilities, they are only accessible by cars. You cannot reach it with public transport. So you are depending on car, and this is a very big issue, especially for the population, for elderly population, which is not physical or is not in a condition to drive a car anymore, and they belong to other people who are driving to perform shopping or something like this. This is a very big issue, and there are various projects always going on to improve the situations, micro public transport services, something like this. So you don't use big buses, you use small vans or like a taxi service, which is cheaper in operation. But I mean, this micro public transport system, this is also, I think, since 2-3 decades, we have seen a lot of projects, but it's not really a final solution, because it also needs financial support. It's not really shifting the people from the cars to these public transport services.
Yeah, then there are no more in the chat. Are there questions in the audience? Okay. Yeah, then I would say thank you very much for the presentations, for all your arguments, and yeah, see you next time in the lessons. And yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.